You can't handle me alone," said the giant Apache woman, her shadow stretching across the sunburnt canyon like a warning. Men twice his size had backed away from her, their pride scattered like dust under her boots. But the lone cowboy didn't step back. He simply looked up, steady as a stone in a river of fear. In a land where strength was measured in scars, their paths were never meant to cross. So why did she turn toward him? Not to crush him, but as if she'd been waiting. A dry wind scraped across the canyon floor, lifting sand in slow spirals around an abandoned campfire ring. A single metal cup lay overturned in the dirt, still warm, as if its owner had walked away only seconds before. The smell of smoke and horse sweat lingered in the air, clinging to the rocks like a warning left behind. The giant Apache woman stood alone beside a weathered mule, tightening the leather strap across its saddle with practiced force. Her hands moved with precision, no hesitation, no softness, each pull of the strap echoing like a drumbeat against the canyon walls. Warriors had tried to break her will. Raiders had tried to corner her. None had succeeded. Every man who approached her with steel in his eyes had left with blood in his mouth. Hoofsteps approached from beyond the ridge, steady, unhurried. Not the reckless rhythm of bounty hunters or drunk ranch hands. This was different. A controlled pace, almost disrespectful in how calm it sounded. Her head lifted slightly, more instinct than curiosity, the feather braided into her hair rustling in the breeze. At the far bend, where the canyon narrowed into a passage of sheer red stone, a lone rider appeared. No posse, no flag, no raised rifle. Just one man moving through the dust like he had nowhere urgent to be, and yet every step of his horse pressed directly toward her. She didn't reach for her blade. She didn't need to. Her presence alone had sent armed men stumbling backward, hands shaking before steel had even left its sheath. But this one didn't slow. The mule let out a low, uneasy bray. She didn't look at the rider. She simply spoke, voice low as rolling thunder. "Turn back." The rider didn't. She stepped forward, the ground seeming to shift under her weight, eyes narrowed against the sun. Men feared her because she never gave warnings twice, and yet the breeze held still, waiting. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint rattle of dry brush being disturbed somewhere up the trail. The giant Apache woman kept her eyes fixed on the lone rider, reading more in the way he held his reins than most men could ever speak. He didn't grip them tight like a man afraid. His posture held no tension. That alone made him dangerous. The mule stamped the ground again. Its ear flicked nervously toward a splinter of metal lying half buried in the dirt near the fire ring. A tin canteen, dented, forgotten. She noticed it. Barely. Supplies mattered out here. Water was life. Most men left only when forced by thirst. The cowboy dismounted without a word, boots sliding against the gravel with a low crunch. He didn't reach for his gun, didn't raise his hands to show peace. He simply tied his horse's reins loosely to a sun-bleached branch, like a man setting camp where he intended to stay. Her jaw tightened. "This land isn't yours." The man looked around at the canyon walls as if taking measure of her words. "Doesn't look like it's yours either." A muscle shifted in her cheek. Most men spat that line with arrogance. He said it like a fact carved into stone. The metal canteen glinted again, catching the sun just as a gust of wind sent sand sweeping across it. The cowboy's gaze flicked toward it. Without thinking, the Apache woman nudged it closer to him with the tip of her boot, not offering, just moving it within his reach. A silent acknowledgement. You rode far. You'll need water before the land breaks you. A gesture of care, brief, unspoken. He didn't thank her. Instead, he crouched and picked it up, turning it in his hand. "Empty?" he asked. She didn't answer. He opened it anyway, dry, bone dry. He let it drop. It hit the gravel with a hollow clink that echoed like a warning shot. They stood like two animals, measuring the dust between them. He rested a hand on his saddlebag, not in threat, but as if confirming something inside still remained. She noticed. "Still walking," he said simply. "Then keep walking," she replied. That earned the faintest flicker of something in his expression. Not amusement, recognition. A distant metallic clang rang from deeper in the canyon, so faint it could have been mistaken for the shifting of rocks, but she heard it clearly. Iron, hammered or dropped. Not natural. Her head turned slightly, nostrils flaring. The cowboy noticed the change before she spoke. "You expecting someone?" She didn't like that he saw it. Her stance hardened. "Someone's coming." He didn't reach for his weapon. Instead, he scanned the canyon rim, eyes tracing the high ledges where dust began to stir in irregular bursts. Not wind. Movement. The mule brayed again, this time louder, rope straining. The Apache woman stepped past the cold fire ring and grabbed the animal's harness, steadying it with a firm pull. Even the smallest act of control in a moment like this could shift fate. She didn't look back at the cowboy. "You still want to stay?" she asked without turning. He wiped a thumb across the dust on his coat, eyes never leaving the canyon ridge. "Staying wasn't the question," he said. She let go of the mule's reins. For a moment, silence stretched between them, tight as a rope before it snaps. Then, a gunshot. Faint, distant, but sharp enough to split the air. Not a warning, a signal. Her eyes narrowed, heartbeat steady, not fast. This wasn't a hunter's shot. It was an arrival. The cowboy glanced at her, not for guidance, but in acknowledgement of a truth they both felt. Someone else had just entered the canyon, and they were not alone anymore. A shiver of wind snaked through the canyon, carrying with it a scent that didn't belong. Ink and cold metal, the kind found on papers carried by lawmen and debt collectors. The Apache woman caught it before the sound reached them. A scent of authority pretending to be order. Bootsteps echoed faintly, not running, marching. That rhythm only followed men who believed their presence was justified by a seal or a signature. The cowboy adjusted the brim of his hat, not in fear, but like a man squinting at an oncoming storm he'd been expecting. His voice remained level. "Lawman?" She didn't look at him. "No law for people like me." A distant jingle of spurs, too uniform to be drifters. Then horses, more than 3, less than 10, moving with practiced discipline, not raiders. Raiders rode like wolves. This rode like a posse paid to look official. "Bounty riders?" he asked. She didn't answer directly. "Men with papers think they don't bleed." He watched the ridge. Men with papers drag others into chains before bleeding. The mule stamped anxiously, ears pinned flat. She pressed a steadying hand against its neck. Another brief act of control, grounding. Her fingers brushed rough fur, and for a moment the animal stilled, the tension shifting from beast to land itself. The cowboy's voice cut quietly through the dry air. "You've seen them before." Her jaw clenched. "They come with lists, names, claims, land marked red on maps drawn at desks far from this dirt." He nodded slowly. "Maps don't show graves." Down the canyon, a flutter of white caught the sunlight, paper nailed to a post lodged in the sand. The wind tore at its edges, revealing the corner of a seal pressed into wax. A public notice, placed deliberately. The cowboy spoke without turning. "That posted for you." She didn't flinch. "They post paper when they plan to take what they can't win in a fight." He stepped toward it, slow, measured. She didn't stop him, but her eyes followed every movement, as if allowing him to approach the notice meant something unspoken. He reached the paper, tugged it free, dusted sand from the front. "Reads like a land seizure," he said. Her silence was confirmation. He scanned it again. "And a name listed as—" He paused. His mouth tightened. "They didn't even write it, just called it unclaimed territory, occupied without permit." Her gaze hardened. "They don't write our names so they don't have to remember them." The wind tore the paper from his hand. It spun into the dust like a wounded bird before being crushed under his boot. He didn't bother retrieving it. His next words were low. "They ride under sheriff custody." "Sheriff gets coin for every eviction," she replied, "and coin makes men brave." The canyon grew quieter, too quiet. No bird calls. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath like the land itself waited for blood. The cowboy rested a hand near his holster, not gripping, just ready. "You planning to stand?" he asked, "or disappear like they want?" Her head turned slightly. For the first time, she looked at him not as an intruder, but as someone who had just stepped onto her side of the canyon line. "They think I'll run," she said. He nodded once. "So you don't look like someone who runs." She stepped past him, facing the canyon mouth fully, her back straight, hair shifting in the wind like a battle banner. "No," she said quietly. "I wait." The cowboy's eyes narrowed. "For what?" She didn't turn. Her voice was steady. "For the first man who thinks paper makes him stronger than me." Up ahead, a rifle bolt slid into chamber, loud enough to echo through the canyon like a match struck before wildfire. The sharp metallic click echoed across the canyon walls, bouncing off the red stone like a warning meant for both of them. The cowboy shifted his stance, not drawing, just planting his feet in the dust as if he intended to belong there. The Apache woman didn't flinch. Her eyes tracked the ridge where the sound had come from. Voices followed, muffled at first, then clearer as horses crested the ridge above, silhouettes cutting against the pale sun. 5 riders, maybe 6. Their horses were too clean for drifters. Their coats matched just enough to look official. A badge glinted on one man's chest, catching the light like a mirror held to a wound. The cowboy muttered, low, "Sheriff's men." The Apache woman's jaw tightened. "Sheriff sends men when he's too afraid to come himself." Hooves scraped against stone. A rider urged his horse forward, his voice carrying down into the canyon with the confidence of someone used to being heard. "Territory ahead is marked for claim by county order," he called. "Any persons present are required to vacate under penalty of seizure." The cowboy didn't look up. They talked like lawyers to make gunfire sound clean. One of the riders stood in the stirrups, unrolling a paper. His voice dripped with forced civility. "By the authority of the county and the office of Sheriff Holden, this land is to be cleared of all unauthorized occupants. Compliance will be taken as goodwill. Resistance will be written as criminal defiance." The Apache woman raised her head just enough so the wind lifted a strand of her hair like a banner. Her voice was steady. "Let them write." The rider hesitated, clearly expecting her to plead, argue, anything but stand silent. Another rider, younger, leaned forward. His tone was almost mocking. "Word is there's a woman down there thinks she's stronger than a badge." The cowboy finally looked up. His eyes didn't show fear. They just measured things. Distance, angle, how fast a man could draw from horseback. He spoke, but not to the riders. "Badge won't stop the bullet. Paper won't stop the ground from taking them." The Apache woman's gaze flicked briefly toward him, just enough to register his words. Then she stepped forward, shoulder brushing past him in a motion that spoke louder than any truce. She wasn't asking for help, but she wasn't refusing it either. The lead rider raised his hand. "Last warning, walk away now, and this stays peaceful." The cowboy glanced sideways at her. "You walk?" She didn't move. "I was born here. I don't walk from my own ground." The riders exchanged looks. The lead man clucked his horse forward a few paces. The badge on his chest caught the sun again. "Then you'll die on it." She stepped closer, dust rising around her boots. Her voice carried without shouting. "Then write that down, too." For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Even the wind held back like it wanted to see what would happen next. Then came the twist. The younger rider pulled out another document, this one smaller, folded tight. He held it up between 2 gloved fingers. "We're not just here for land," he said. "We have orders to take custody of an identified threat, a woman of unusual size and hostile disposition." His eyes locked on her. Fitting description. The cowboy's eyes didn't widen, but something settled in his posture. A realization. "They're not just clearing land," he said quietly. "They're hunting you." The Apache woman didn't deny it. The lead rider lifted his hand again. "Seize her!" The command rippled through the posse like a spark on dry grass. The mule screamed, pulling hard against its tether. And from somewhere behind the riders, a second gun cocked that did not belong to any of them. The sound of that second hammer being pulled back cut cleaner than the first. Closer, lower, coming not from the ridge but from the canyon wall behind the riders. The posse paused, horses shifting uneasily as dust rolled down from a narrow ledge above them. The lead rider jerked his head, scanning the rocks. "Who's there?" "Show yourself." No answer came, only the echo of his own voice, swallowed by the stone. The cowboy didn't move. His hand hovered near his holster but never touched it. He spoke softly, almost conversational. "Someone doesn't like your odds." The Apache woman remained still, eyes fixed not on the riders but on the line where sunlight met shadow across the canyon rock. She listened, body tilted slightly, reading the land through silence like others read letters. Another metallic shift sounded. Definitely a rifle, positioned high out of sight. The posse fanned slightly, uneasy. One of the younger horses sidestepped, nearly unseating its rider. The lead man snarled, "This is sheriff land. Anyone interfering will be charged with aiding a fugitive." The cowboy's voice stayed calm. "Funny thing about land. It doesn't speak, doesn't sign papers, just buries things." The woman's gaze narrowed. "That's not my doing." She meant the rifle above. She knew every soul who traveled this canyon. Whoever was up there wasn't hers. One of the riders raised his rifle toward the ridge. "Come out, or we fire." A long silence answered him. Then a single spent shell casing tumbled from the rocks above, clinking down beside his boot like a warning tossed from heaven. The rider froze. The wind picked up again, edging around the canyon walls with a sound like whispered laughter. The cowboy's eyes tracked the falling shell, then lifted slowly to the ridge. "You boys came to collect one woman," he said. "Looks like you found more than you planned." The lead rider, jaw tight with embarrassment, raised his voice. "You're surrounded. If you don't hand her over, we'll drag her ourselves." The Apache woman finally turned to face them directly. "Try." The word hung in the air like a thrown knife. The cowboy tilted his head. "Careful. She only says a word when she's sure of it." The posse shifted, hands tightening on reins. The mule brayed again, then abruptly stopped, ears twisting toward the canyon mouth. A new sound emerged. Not rifles, not horses. Wheels. A wagon, rolling slow, steady, carrying weight. The riders turned, momentarily caught between threats, one above, unseen, and one approaching from behind. The lead man spat into the dust. "This canyon just keeps getting crowded." The cowboy watched the ridge. Crowded can be dangerous. Crowded means no one knows who'll shoot first. Hoofbeats and wood creaked in rhythm now, getting closer. Not a farmer's wagon. Too controlled, too quiet. A supply wagon. Or something worse. The Apache woman's expression remained unreadable, but a subtle shift in her shoulders betrayed tension. Not fear, but anticipation. She spoke low enough only the cowboy could hear. "They didn't ride alone." "Never do," he answered. The wagon drew into view at the canyon mouth, plain, covered in canvas, pulled by two strong horses, no markings. But the man driving it wore a coat cleaner than any settler. He held the reins with one hand, and a sealed ledger book in the other. Not a gun, a ledger. The cowboy's voice dropped, something colder than anger settling beneath it. "They brought a registrar." The Apache woman's eyes hardened like flint struck against steel. "Paper before bullets," she muttered. The wagon rolled to a stop, wheels grinding in the dust. The man on the seat looked down at them with the calm of someone who believed ink had more killing power than lead. And from the ridge above, the unseen rifle clicked once more, adjusting aim. The man on the wagon seat adjusted his coat, as if dust itself should have known better than to touch him. He didn't raise his voice, didn't brandish a weapon. He simply opened the leather-bound ledger across his knees, its pages neat and pale against the sunburnt world around him. He spoke like a clerk at a desk, not a man in a canyon surrounded by rifles. Property designated as Sector 14C. Occupied without permit by an unregistered native female of extraordinary physical threat classification. The word classification hung in the air like a cold iron chain. The cowboy's jaw set. Interesting way to say person. The ledger man didn't look at him. Words matter, paper matters. Paper determines what remains and what is removed. The Apache woman's voice came low and steady. "Paper burns." He finally looked at her then, not with anger, with interest. Like a collector seeing a rare specimen, Miss or rather unlisted female designate, records say you've resisted 3 prior relocation attempts. The riders shifted in their saddles. They hadn't known that. The cowboy glanced at her. "You've stood them down before." She didn't look away from the man on the wagon. "They brought guns." I sent them home walking. The registrar nodded slowly, as if making a note. This time, we bring ink. Ink travels farther than bullets. Up on the ridge, the unseen rifle clicked again, a slow, deliberate shift of weight. The posse riders tensed at the sound, horses skittering sideways. The registrar didn't flinch. He closed the ledger halfway, finger marking a page. Last offer, sign removal. Vacate. In exchange, you keep your life and whatever possessions can be carried on foot. Refuse. He paused. Not for effect, but to let the canyon hear him breathe. And you will be documented as hostile, seized, processed. The land will be cleared either way. The cowboy spoke quietly. You speak like the ground answers to you. The registrar looked at him for the first time with a hint of disdain. The ground answers to whoever keeps records of it. Names fade, deeds endure. The Apache woman stepped forward, slow and deliberate, like approaching a fire. Write this down, she said. The registrar raised his brow. I will. She held his gaze. This ground had a name before your deeds. It remembers. I stand because I remember it too. He dipped his pen in ink. And yet, he said calmly, memory holds no legal weight. The cowboy's hand hovered just above his holster, not to draw, just existing there like a thought made visible. You ever notice, he said softly, how men who carry ledgers come in wagons, and men who die by rifle never see it coming? One of the riders snapped, You threatening? The registrar lifted a hand, silencing him without looking. His attention turned upward, toward the ridge. I am aware of the rifleman, he said. We counted one shadow too many on approach. He raised his voice, but only slightly. To the unseen party, you aim without authority. Interference in county procedure is punishable. The canyon answered with silence. Then a pebble tumbled down from the upper ledge, landing inches from the registrar's boot. The cowboy's eyes narrowed. Paper doesn't scare shadows. The registrar returned his eyes to the ledger. Shadows can be listed too. The Apache woman took another step, boots grinding against the dust. Write all you want, but understand something. He paused. Yes. Her voice was quiet, but it cut like a blade drawn slow from a sheath. I have never killed a man carrying a gun. The riders shifted. One muttered, What does that mean? She didn't blink. It means the first men I bury are always the ones holding paper. The registrar's pen halted mid-air, up on the ridge. The rifleman exhaled, and this time the sound wasn't a click. It was the slow, unmistakable pull of a trigger being taken to its breaking point. The trigger snapped. A single shot cracked through the canyon like lightning striking dry wood. Dust erupted inches from the registrar's boot, tearing a hole clean through the corner of his ledger. Paper flew in a burst of white scraps, scattering like startled birds. The registrar didn't flinch. He simply looked down at the smoking tear in his document, then up at the ridge, expression unreadable. One of the posse riders swore and jerked his horse back, rifle half raised. Show yourself, he shouted toward the rocks. Coward! The unseen rifle answered with silence. The Apache woman watched the fluttering scraps of paper drift on the wind. Not a shot to kill, a shot to mark, to say, I see you. The cowboy spoke first, voice calm as if remarking on weather, ledgers bleeding. The registrar brushed a scrap of paper from his coat with 2 fingers. That was a warning shot. The cowboy's eyes tracked the ridge. No. That was a signature. The registrar looked at him, then at the Apache woman. You brought a sniper. She didn't move. I didn't bring anyone. One of the riders spat. Lies. No one camps this canyon without scouts. The cowboy turned his head just enough to meet the registrar's gaze. If she wanted you dead, he said, you wouldn't have heard the shot. A flicker of uncertainty passed through the riders, small but visible. Saddles creaked. One horse stamped nervously against the rocks. The air tasted like metal. The registrar closed the ledger slowly, careful not to tear the ruined page further. One anonymous gun does not change the record, he said. Law stands. Law sits, the cowboy muttered. Up there, calm as Sunday. A long moment passed. The Apache woman stepped once more toward the posse, boots sinking slightly in the soft dust. The movement drew every rifle barrel like iron to a magnet. The lead rider raised his weapon. "Stay back," she kept walking. The cowboy didn't stop her, but he spoke toward the posse without raising his voice. "You pull that trigger, and the man above decides you started a war. You ready to justify that on paper?" The registrar's pen hovered again over the damaged ledger, its tip stained black. He spoke to his riders without looking at them. "Hold fire." The riders hesitated, but the authority in his tone pinned their triggers like nails through skin. The Apache woman stopped 10 paces away from the nearest horse. She looked up toward the ridge, not to call for help, just to acknowledge the watcher. She spoke quietly, not to the riders and not to the sniper. "I don't know you." The canyon didn't respond. The rifleman remained unseen. She turned her head slightly to the cowboy. "You know his hand." He kept his eyes on the ridge. "Not his hand," he said, "but I've seen his patience." The registrar finally glanced upward too, his voice cooling. "Whoever you are," he called, "you interfere with county procedure, you can still withdraw." For a moment there was nothing. Then a small glint. A mirror signal flashed briefly from the ridge, reflecting sunlight in a single controlled beam. Not random, deliberate, like a reply. The posse riders shifted uneasily. The cowboy's jaw tightened. "He answers in light. That means he won't speak twice." The registrar lowered the ledger, eyes narrowing. "Then let him speak once more," he said coldly, "and the county will answer with 10 rifles in return." A distant horse whinnied from somewhere further down the canyon, beyond even the posse's line of sight. Another arrival. The Apache woman lifted her head. "More riders." The registrar snapped the ledger shut. "Reinforcements," he said. "Ours." The cowboy didn't blink. Or someone else's. Wind lashed across the canyon again. The dust shifted. From far down the trail came the faint, rattling jingle of chains. Not cavalry, not lawmen. Something else. Something dragged. The chains rattled again, metallic and uneven, like someone being dragged, not escorted. The posse riders exchanged confused looks. The registrar's calm expression tightened for the first time. Just slightly. He turned his head toward the sound. "Who approaches?" No one answered. The cowboy's eyes narrowed. "You didn't call more men." The registrar replied, voice clipped. "We called no chain escorts." The Apache woman stepped 1 pace backward, not in retreat, but to widen her sightline. Her breath slowed, her whole posture shifting to hunter's stillness. From around the canyon bend came 2 horses pulling a second wagon, this one lower, heavier, boards reinforced with iron bands. A cage sat on its bed, covered loosely by canvas. The iron beneath glinted like exposed teeth. One of the riders cursed under his breath. "We weren't told about a prisoner transport." The registrar's tone thinned. "We authorized no such delivery." The cowboy glanced sideways. "Paper losing control." The lead rider spurred forward, shouting toward the wagon, "State your division." The driver didn't respond. He kept his head low beneath his hat brim, face unseen. The horses pulled the cage forward until it sat between the Apache woman and the posse, like some unwanted offering placed on sacred ground. The registrar spoke louder. "Driver, identify." Only then did the man look up. His face was tired, skin pale beneath dust, eyes sunken. Not a lawman, not a bandit. Something worse. Someone who didn't care who owned the ground as long as he could cross it. He spoke as if reciting numbers. "Ordered to deliver 1 hostile asset to county control." The registrar stiffened. "There is no record of that assignment." The driver shrugged slightly. "Record or no, chains don't lie." The cowboy stepped forward, scanning the cage. "What's in there?" No answer came. The Apache woman's gaze stayed locked on the cage. She didn't blink. Her voice dropped like thunder behind mountains. "You brought another." The driver tugged the canvas back with one rough motion. Inside, curled against the iron bars like a wounded animal, sat a massive figure. Apache like her, but chained by wrists, ankles, and throat, restraints biting into flesh. His shoulders were broad as stone slabs, skin bruised and raw where the iron cut in. His hair hung matted over his face, blood tangled in the strands. The posse riders fell briefly silent, unsettled by the sheer size of him. One muttered, "That another giant." The registrar looked sharply at the driver. "This is not a sanctioned prisoner." The driver didn't blink. "You want him? Paper says you get him." The cowboy's voice dropped. "They're delivering giants in chains now." The Apache woman didn't move, but her eyes sharpened like flint. "That is no prisoner," she said. "That is a warning." The registrar frowned. "Explain." She kept her eyes on the chained figure. "They bring him so. When they write my name, they say I belonged in chains just the same." The sniper above remained silent, but the canyon itself felt like it was listening. The registrar turned slowly toward her. "You know him?" Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look away from the cage. "I know what they do to giants once paper claims them," she said. "They turn people into examples." The wind shifted. The man in the cage lifted his head slightly, heavy chains scraping. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. He didn't speak, but he looked at her, not pleading, not broken, just recognizing. The cowboy watched her face. For the first time, something like anger flickered across her eyes. Not hot, but cold forged. The registrar straightened. "Then we process both," he said. "2 seizures instead of 1. The cowboy spoke without turning. "You think 2 giants break easier than 1? The registrar didn't answer. Up on the ridge and the rifle clicked again, not at the posse, not at her. It angled slowly toward the cage. And the giant inside lifted his head, eyes locking with the canyon's silent gunman. Something old and dangerous passed between them, something not written in any ledger. The chains around the caged giant clinked with a dull, heavy rhythm as he shifted his wrists, iron biting deeper. The posse riders kept glancing between the woman, the cowboy, and the silent figure in the cage, as if trying to measure which threat breathed loudest. The registrar stepped closer to the wagon, ledger tucked under his arm like a holy book he refused to let go. He spoke to the driver without raising his voice. "Who signed the transfer order?" The driver wiped dust from his brow. "Didn't say. Paper had no proper seal. Just a red mark." The cowboy's head tilted slightly. "Red mark means no name wanted to own it." The registrar's eyes narrowed. His voice cooled. "Then this prisoner is off record. Which means no one will ask if he disappears." The Apache woman stepped forward, slow and deliberate. Chains rattled inside the cage as the giant turned slightly toward her, sensing movement. The posse shifted, fingers tightening on their triggers. The cowboy spoke quietly toward her. "You step closer, they shoot." She didn't stop. The registrar raised a hand. "Remain back. Intervention with secured assets is—" The woman ignored him, walking until she stood within 5 paces of the cage. The chained giant lifted his head fully now, blood drying along his cheek, one eye nearly swollen shut, the other eye steady, clear, not pleading. She crouched slowly, knees touching the dust. She didn't reach out. She didn't speak. For a moment, the canyon held a rare silence that wasn't fear, it was recognition. The cowboy watched her closely. He understood something then. She wasn't here just to stand her ground. She was here because someone like this man was taken once before, someone she couldn't reach in time. The registrar shifted, irritated. "These 2 will be processed together then. Same classification, hostile native assets scheduled for relocation and labor assignment." The cowboy spoke without moving his eyes from the chained giant. "Labor," he said softly. "That what you call cages in the desert?" One of the posse riders spat. "Work keeps them alive better than a bullet." The woman rose slowly. "A bullet kills fast. Chains kill slow." The chained giant's chest rose with a faint, strained laugh, not humor but agreement. Even broken, he refused to bow his head. Up on the ridge, the sniper's rifle shifted again, aiming lower now, toward the chain link on the giant's wrist. The cowboy's eyes flicked upward. He spoke in a near whisper. "He's not aiming to kill, he's aiming to cut." The registrar snapped his head up. "Shoot her on the ridge. Stand down." The canyon didn't answer. Then a single word escaped the chained man, voice raw, barely human. "Leave." The posse reacted to the sound like a whip crack. One rider jerked his rifle up, startled. "He speaks!" The registrar stepped forward. "Silence the prisoner." The cowboy spoke without looking at him. "You silence him, that rifle fires." The riders hesitated. Their horses sensed it too, heads tossing, eyes wide. The Apache woman stood between the cage and the posse now, not in a stance to attack, in a stance to witness, shoulders broad, chin high, like someone standing at a grave that hadn't been dug yet. The registrar's voice cut sharp. "We seize land. We seize bodies. We do not negotiate with stone and anger." The cowboy finally turned to him, voice low. "Stone and anger outlive ink." The registrar opened his mouth to respond, but the sound he made next wasn't a word. It was a gasp, because above them, the rifle fired again, but not at men, not even at metal. It hit canvas. A burning spark ripped through the wagon's covering, igniting the cloth in a sudden flash of flame. Fire climbed the fabric like it had been waiting for breath. The chains reflected the firelight, and in that flicker, the giant in the cage lifted his head fully, eyes catching the blaze like a signal meant just for him. The registrar stepped back. The posse riders shouted, pulling horses away from the sparks. The cowboy didn't move. The Apache woman's lips parted, not in fear, in understanding. The sniper was not trying to kill. He was starting the fire that would burn the paper. The wind shifted again, pushing a wave of fire-scorched air toward the posse. One rider covered his mouth with his sleeve, coughing as smoke curled around them like a living thing, hungry and rising. The registrar pointed toward the cage. "If that chain breaks," the cowboy cut in, voice flat, "it will." The registrar turned to him sharply. "Then you understand the danger." The cowboy didn't break eye contact. "I understand yours." The Apache woman stayed perfectly still, her shadow stretching long behind her in the firelight like a second figure, taller than she was, like the land itself stood with her. Inside the cage, the giant rotated his shoulder slowly, testing how far the broken wrist could move. Blood simmered against the hot iron, sealing itself in the burn. His breathing remained calm, steady, a soldier preparing, not a man breaking. One of the older posse riders, eyes sunken with more winters than the others, stared at the chained figure with something that wasn't fear. It was memory. He spoke softly, barely above a breath. "I've seen him before." The registrar whipped his head toward him. "What?" The old rider didn't look away from the cage. "Years back, at the river crossing near Red Mesa, a camp was cleared by force. They said one giant wouldn't go. Took 6 rifles to bring him down." He didn't scream. The registrar spoke sharply. "That is county rumor." The rider shook his head slowly. "County rumor bleeds like any other." The cowboy's voice was quiet. "Stories reach further than deeds." The registrar stiffened. "Enough folklore. A man in chains is a man contained." But his gaze betrayed doubt, just a flicker of something behind his eyes. He clutched the ledger tighter, knuckles white. The Apache woman shifted her stance, not aggressive, anchored, like a tree that had decided not to fall. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "The land remembers those chains." The registrar exhaled through his nose, steadying himself. "If the land remembers, it will witness as we carry out lawful process." The cowboy stepped once, dust swirling around his boot. "You think law carves truth, but fire carves clearer." The flame surged suddenly as a gust of wind whipped through the canyon. Sparks spiraled upward like embers seeking sky. The wagon wheels groaned under the growing heat. One posse rider, desperation cracking through his voice, shouted toward the ridge. "Whoever you are, you don't need to do this." A pause. Then that voice came again from high above, slow, controlled. "I'm not here for need." The cowboy's eyes narrowed. "He's here for choice." The Apache woman turned her head slightly, gaze still on the cage. "Choice is what they wanted to take." The registrar straightened, forcing control back into his voice. "We are authorized to remove hostile elements. We do it by ledger, not opinion." The cowboy's reply came like gravel sliding. "Ledger brought fire. Fire brings witness." The registrar glanced once toward the burning wagon. The canvas had nearly collapsed, flames now eating into the wheels. The smell of scorched wood rolled through the canyon like a funeral march. The old rider who had spoken earlier eased his horse back a step. His voice came hollow. "Sir, if that cage splits, you'll be writing more than land orders." The registrar's control cracked for a moment. "Hold your post." The rider hesitated, then said, in a tone that no longer sounded like a lawman, but like a man who had lived long enough to know when paper lost its power, "Paper can't hold back a fire, sir." Silence. Then, a soft sound, almost too quiet to hear, unless you were close. Metal fiber tearing. The second wrist shackle bent 1 degree more, a hiss of iron like a serpent warming in flame. The giant, in chains and blood, finally lifted both arms just slightly, not to strike. To feel the air, unbound at the wrist, his fingers opened. For the first time, the registrar looked afraid. His eyes flicked from the chain, to the woman, to the cowboy, then up, to the ridge. The sniper's rifle barrel caught a glint of firelight, not aimed at the posse, not at the registrar, not even at the cage now. It angled lower, toward the ledger. The sniper's barrel steadied, barely moving, tracking the registrar's ledger like a man tracking the only thing left worth shooting. The registrar noticed, a flicker of alarm cutting through his composure. He took one involuntary step back, dust kicking beneath his polished boots. "Take aim on the ridge," he ordered, but his voice cracked barely enough for the riders to hear it. Crack in command, crack in certainty, crack in the clean lines of county order. None of the riders moved. One man's hand hovered uselessly at his holster, fingers trembling. Another looked between the burning wagon, the half-freed giant, and the ridge sniper, as if trying to decide which would kill him slower. Their horses shifted uneasily, hooves grinding against stone, moving them backward without their rider's consent. Even animals knew when law meant nothing to fire or chain. The registrar repeated, louder now, forcing command into his throat. "Raise your rifles." But the posse riders looked at him like men hearing a sermon while the church burned. The cowboy stood still, shoulders relaxed, eyes never leaving the ridge. His voice was so quiet, it cut deeper than a shout. "Ledger or chain," he said. "One breaks today." The registrar's jaw tightened. "Both will be contained." The Apache woman stepped forward, standing directly between the ledger and the cage, between the sniper's line and the chain. She didn't lift her hands. She didn't draw a weapon. She simply stood like stone that refused to move for storm or law. The fire surged behind her, painting her silhouette against the smoke. Not a prisoner, not a threatened woman, an obstacle. The registrar spoke through clenched teeth. "Step aside." She didn't. The cowboy looked at the registrar. "You think she stands for him?" The registrar said nothing. The cowboy's gaze shifted. Slow. "No. She stands for what you keep writing out." Something in that struck deeper than heat or chain. The registrar's voice was a thin wire now. "If that rifle fires, county law will brand this an insurrection." The cowboy gave a single, almost tired exhale. "Law already branded it. Fire just makes it honest." Then, the second shackle snapped. The sound tore through the canyon, sharp and final, like a verdict delivered by iron itself. A fragment of chain hit the ground, glowing red, kicking up dust. The giant lifted his freed arm fully now. The remaining iron still bound his ankles and throat, but that one arm, bloodied, burned, free, rose like a banner ripped from enemy hands. The posse riders fell silent. The registrar stared, ledger clutched to his chest. The sniper's rifle didn't fire, it just held still, waiting. The Apache woman looked once, not at the giant, but at the cowboy. He met her eyes. No words were spoken, but something had already shifted. The canyon felt it. The registrar stood rigid, the scorched ledger still clutched to his chest, as if it were a shield made of scripture. His eyes were fixed on the giant's freed arm, his voice cold but stretched thin as wire. "Restrain him, now." None of the riders moved. The giant, still half-bound, turned his head slowly, iron collar biting into his neck with the motion. Though he said nothing, the message was clear. If they approached, he would rise anyway, chain or no chain. The registrar tried again, louder. "That is an order. Secure him before he—" The cowboy interrupted without raising his voice. "Before he stands." The registrar froze, words caught in his throat. The cowboy took one slow step forward, boots grinding in the dirt. "You want to write this clean, man in chains, Law in order. Ledger untouched. But fire burned your ink. He nodded toward the cage where the chain still glowed faintly. And iron doesn't wait for permission. The registrar's composure cracked, just slightly. He is still collared. The Apache woman spoke quietly. So were the first rivers they dammed. They still broke through. The registrar turned on her, lips tight. You speak as if this ground belongs to you. She met his gaze, unblinking. Ground doesn't belong. It remembers. One rider, the younger one who had first hesitated, swallowed hard. Sir, maybe we need to fall back. Reinforce. Bring full escort. The registrar snapped without looking at him. You want to retreat from a half-bound savage? The younger rider stared at the cage, voice quieter now. Doesn't look half-bound anymore. The giant straightened slowly, chains clanking against the iron floor of the cage. His freed hand braced against the bar. He didn't lunge. He didn't growl. He simply stood taller, as if to remind the canyon how much space he could claim when allowed to breathe. The registrar saw the movement and stepped back. He masked it by lifting the ledger. Under county law, he said sharply, any resistance classifies this group as insurgents. That includes you. He pointed at the cowboy. And you. His eyes flicked to the Apache woman. If you interfere further, your fates bind to his. The cowboy didn't blink. Papers quick to bind, fires quicker to unbind. A rider cursed under his breath, stepping away from the registrar. The horses shifted again, hooves scraping rock. The fire snapped behind them, sending a column of smoke twisting upward like a black flag. The registrar pointed toward the ridge, shouting now, Sniper! Stand down or be marked as outlaw! For a moment, silence answered. Then the rifle shifted, not lowering, aiming. The barrel angled from the ledger to the registrar's hand. The registrar stiffened. The cowboy's voice dropped. Ink or blood? That's what he's asking. The Apache woman's eyes remained on the giant. He was chained with iron. You chained him with paper. The registrar's nostrils flared. Law is not a chain. The cowboy took another slow step forward. Then why do you hold it like one? The registrar hesitated only a breath too long, and that was enough. One of his own riders, the older one with the graveyard voice, stepped his horse back a full pace, lowering his rifle. Sir, the man said, eyes never leaving the cage, if that second shackle gives, no ledger on earth will matter. The registrar's grip on the book faltered, just slightly, just enough that ash fluttered from its scorched edge. Above them, the sniper repositioned, silent, precise, waiting for a single motion to trigger whatever judgment he carried in that rifle. In the cage, a sound of iron bending, slow and steady. The giant drew a breath, like someone preparing to rise from a long kneel. The registrar finally shouted, desperation replacing doctrine, shoot him before he stands. His men didn't move. No one fired. Not the posse, not the cowboy, not even the sniper. The only sound was iron, stretching. The heat from the burning wagon shimmered like a mirage, blurring the canyon edges until stone looked like it was breathing. The registrar, coat scorched at the sleeve, still held his ledger high like a priest shielding scripture from judgment. Shoot him, he ordered again, voice sharp, brittle, before he rises. His words echoed off the canyon walls, but no one moved. The giant stood inside the cage, shoulders heaving in measured breaths, iron collar glowing faintly at the edges. His free arm hung at his side, blood tracing a slow line down to his palm. He didn't rush. He waited. The Apache woman stood like carved obsidian, posture unbroken, eyes fixed on the collar, not the registrar. Wind curled dust around her legs, coating her skin in a thin layer of earth, as if the canyon itself were wrapping her in armor. The cowboy's fingers rested near his holster, not gripping, just there, like an unspoken line in the dirt. His gaze moved between the registrar and the ridge where the sniper lay unseen. Above, the rifle glinted, just once, not in threat, in aim. One of the younger posse riders, still gripping his rifle with white knuckles, stared between the registrar and the giant. Sweat carved thin lines down his dusted face. For the first time, he spoke, not to his officer but to the man in the cage. Why don't you fight back? The words slipped out, quiet but raw. Fear, mixed with something else he didn't recognize. Respect, maybe, or warning. The giant's head tilted, the iron collar dragging against his neck. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might speak again. But he didn't answer him. Instead, he looked at the Apache woman, and then at the cowboy. Just a single look, but enough to confirm what the canyon already felt. If he rose, he would not rise alone. The registrar saw it too, saw the silent alignment forming before him like storm clouds gathering over dry land. Panic crept into his tone, despite his effort to contain it. "This is your final warning," he shouted. "Step back, all of you." The older rider, still mounted, but no longer aligned in spirit, spoke low. "Sir, maybe we walk away." The registrar's head snapped toward him. "Desert your post and I'll have you written as traitor." The old rider held his gaze. "Write whatever you want. Fire will take it." For the first time, the registrar hesitated. The ledger under his arm crackled as a burned edge flaked away, ash falling like dead snow. Slowly, very slowly, the cowboy lifted one foot and stepped forward. Not fast, not aggressive, just enough that the space between him and the cage narrowed by a single boot length. A gesture of intent. The registrar saw it and recoiled. "You stand with him." The cowboy didn't answer with words. He just took one more step. Now he stood halfway between the cage and the posse. Not a rescuer, not a lawbreaker. A witness, choosing where to stand when chains meet paper. The Apache woman didn't ask permission. She stepped forward too, dust swirling around her like smoke around fire. Two figures, standing between law and chain. The registrar's voice cracked. "Riders, restrain them." No one moved. The sniper's rifle shifted again. This time, the barrel stopped moving, locked, squarely on the registrar. The canyon seemed to tighten, holding its breath. The giant, inside the cage, placed his free hand slowly against the iron floor. He curled his fingers into the dirt, not to lift himself, to feel the ground. The registrar, hand trembling now, lifted the ledger, like a man trying to raise a shield made of parchment. "Last warning," he shouted. "Stand down." The cowboy turned his head just slightly, not to the registrar, not to the riders, to the ridge, like a signal. Somewhere above, a finger rested heavy on a trigger. The second shackle, glowing, strained, cracked. A single link split. And in that instant, the registrar made the mistake of raising his hand. And in that instant, the registrar made the mistake of raising his hand. It wasn't a gun hand. It wasn't even a gesture meant to strike. It was instinct. The same instinct that makes a drowning man reach for air even when none remains. He lifted the ledger as if to command the world one more time. The canyon did not recognize that authority. The posse watched his hand rise, but no obedience followed. A rider on the far left shifted his weight, boots creaking in the stirrups. His rifle sagged, not lowered by choice, but by gravity, the kind that pulls on a man's soul when belief starts to rot. Another rider's horse backed a step on its own, hooves grinding stone, nostrils flaring as if scenting something older than gunpowder, fear of what breaks free. The giant didn't look at the registrar's raised hand. He looked at the dust that billowed from the movement, watching the air like a predator watches water ripple before the strike. His second shackle strained again, metal hissing like something alive, fighting its own birth. The Apache woman shifted forward, not fast, just enough that the firelight stretched her shadow long across the ground, merging with the cage shadow until, just for a moment, it looked like the chain connected to her too. The cowboy felt it. His fingers flexed near his holster, not to draw, but like a man rolling tension through his knuckles, before making a choice that couldn't be taken back. He didn't look at the registrar. He looked at the ridge, high above. The sniper lay in the dust, body still as stone, cloak blending with rock. Only his breathing betrayed him, slow, controlled, like a man waiting for the world to line up with the shot he already accepted he would take. A gust of wind swept through the canyon, tearing at coats and flames. The ledger's scorched corner curled inward, blackening further, as if the fire were writing its own answer over the registrar's law. The registrar raised the book higher, voice rising with it. "You are all under authority." His words didn't echo this time. They were swallowed, not by noise, by stillness. The older rider removed his hat slowly, eyes never leaving the cage. "Sir," he said, voice heavy, tired, "authority don't matter when the ground stops listening." The registrar spun on him in disbelief, realizing too late that he no longer commanded a unit, only a circle of men each deciding on their own where to stand. The younger rider, the one who'd asked the giant why he didn't fight back, lowered his rifle all the way now. His voice shook, but it wasn't fear of the giant anymore. "What if he ain't the one rising against us?" he whispered. "What if we're the ones standing wrong?" No one answered him. The fire behind them cracked again, louder now, as if the canyon itself answered on their behalf. The giant placed both hands flat on the ground inside the cage. Chains groaned as he shifted his weight, iron collar dragging against the bar. He wasn't pushing to break free, not yet. He was grounding himself, rooting, like old trees before a storm. A hush fell, a hush so thick even the flames seemed to bend beneath it. The registrar raised the ledger a fraction higher, and that slight movement caught the sniper's eye like a flag. A breath held, a finger tightening, not panic, judgment. Then a single grain of ash floated down and landed on the registrar's page. His eyes followed it down, just for a moment, and in that fraction of a second, every force in the canyon chose where it stood. The air felt thicker, as if the canyon itself had drawn breath and now refused to let it go. Even the fire seemed to lower its roar, flames flickering in a slower rhythm, as though waiting for permission to leap higher. The registrar felt every eye on him, not with obedience but with judgment. His authority, once carried by tone alone, now hung uselessly in the smoke, like a sermon no one believed in anymore. He gripped the ledger tighter, his knuckles paling. "You will obey county law," he forced out, but the words came hollow, more ritual than command. The older rider placed his hat back on his head, slow, deliberate. He didn't look at the registrar when he spoke next. "Law's just a word, sir. Word don't stand when iron does." A different rider, younger, voice uncertain, murmured, "He could have snapped those chains earlier, if he wanted to." The registrar turned sharply. He was contained, but the young rider shook his head once. No, he was waiting. That thought rippled through the group like a cold wind. They hadn't held him. He had allowed himself to be held just long enough to see something, to see who would stand where when the fire finally chose a side. The Apache woman's stance remained unchanged, feet planted as if she had taken root. She didn't need to draw a weapon. Her presence alone bent the moment away from the registrar's control. The cowboy's boots were sunk half an inch deeper into the dust, not from movement, but from stillness, pressed with intention. His fingers had gone so still near his holster that even the dust drifting across them failed to cling, sliding off like it touched something too certain to settle on. High above, the sniper's breathing remained slow, steady. Every inhale matched the giant's rise. Every exhale matched the registrar's tremor. The rifle did not twitch. It simply waited to confirm if the man below still believed a raised ledger could command a canyon. That belief faltered, visible in the slight tremor of the registrar's wrist, the kind of shake a man has when his faith begins to slip out from under his own words. He lifted the ledger a fraction higher, forcing his voice out once more. "Under written authority, The cowboy looked at him, eyes unreadable. "You keep lifting that book," he said quietly, "like it'll shield you from what's coming." The registrar's lip curled. "You think this cage matters. He is still chained." The Apache woman spoke then, voice quiet but cutting. "Chains break easier than men do." The registrar stepped back, one foot skidding in the dust. His polished boot left a drag mark, the first sign he had begun to retreat without meaning to. The giant, hearing every word though no one spoke to him directly, curled his fingers deeper into the dirt. The ground responded, shifting under his palm, dust gathering around his hand as if drawn to wait. One rider noticed. He whispered, "He's not rising to run. He's rising to stand. Not to escape, not to fight, to stand." Something ancient stirred behind that gesture. Something older than ledgers, older than rails, older than territory lines drawn in ink. A force the canyon knew before paper arrived. The fire flared, sending a long tongue of flame across the shattered wood. Sparks burst outward like embers seeking witnesses. One ember landed near the registrar's boot and died in the dirt. Another landed on the corner of the ledger, and this time it did not die. It smoldered, slowly, patiently, like fire that had found something worth eating. The registrar saw it too late. His eyes widened, not at flame. At the look in the giant's eyes, not rage, recognition. The ember on the ledger spread, slow at first, like a coal-tasting paper. The registrar slapped at it reflexively, eyes wide, the motion more frantic than he intended. The ledger slipped in his grip. Ash streaked across the county seal like a dark handprint. The cowboy watched the moment with a stillness sharper than a drawn blade. "Paper burns faster when held too tight," he said. The registrar looked up sharply, breath caught between a command and a denial. The Apache woman didn't speak. She just stepped forward one more pace, and this time she did not stop until her boots touched the metal of the cage. Her hand didn't reach through the bars. She laid her palm flat against the hot iron exterior. Her gesture small enough to miss, but the giant felt it. His fingers shifted against the ground, not in panic, in answer. For the first time since the fire started, he lifted his head all the way, chains dragging like thunder across iron. He looked at her hand on the bar, then at the cowboy, then he turned his head toward the ridge. The sniper saw it. The barrel dipped by a hair, the kind of adjustment a man makes when his shot shifts from warning to oath. The registrar saw none of it. He only saw his ledger begin to crumble in his grasp, pages curling inward like dry leaves, flames licking the edge as the county seal withered into black. His voice broke. "Stop this!" It wasn't a command. It was a plea. But the canyon was long past listening. A final pop from the iron rang out, sharp, clean. The last shackle gave, and in that breath between break and movement, the giant began to rise. The giant didn't lunge from the cage. He rose, slowly, steadily, like a mountain forcing itself back through the earth after being buried. Iron links still bound his ankles, the collar still cinched tight against his throat, but his spine straightened inch by inch until he stood at full height, and the cage, built to hold beasts, looked suddenly too small to contain a man. The registrar stumbled back a step, eyes fixed not on the rising figure, but on the burning ledger in his trembling hands. Flames crawled greedily along its edges, blackening each page with a hunger that ignored titles, seals, jurisdiction. No, no. He tried to bat the fire down with his sleeve, desperately shielding the book as if saving the writing could still rewrite the moment. "This is county law. This is—" The cowboy's voice cut through him like cold iron. "That's just paper now." A crack split across the iron bar of the cage as the giant's shoulder brushed it. The metal screamed. Horses reared in terror. One rider lost his grip entirely, falling hard into the dust. His rifle clattered away, untouched. The registrar looked wildly to his men. "Fire! Fire on him!" Nobody moved. The younger rider, hands shaking, raised his rifle halfway, then froze, sight fixed on the Apache woman's hand, still resting against the cage. She didn't push. She didn't beg. She was simply there, bearing witness. "Do it!" the registrar shouted, voice breaking. No rider fired, but somewhere above, the sniper exhaled. The shot came like thunder, not into the giant, not into the posse, into the ledger. The bullet tore through the burning book, ripping it clean from the registrar's grip. Paper exploded into ash mid-air, embers scattered like black snow. The registrar cried out, as what remained of county law flew from his hands and burned in the dust. Silence followed, a heavy, stunning silence, broken only by the groan of iron as the giant placed one hand against the warped cage door. He didn't smash it down, he pushed. It yielded. Screws strained. Bolts shifted. The hinges screamed in protest, then snapped. The cage door sagged open, hanging crooked like the mouth of something that once believed it could hold. The registrar stumbled backward, coat scorched, face ash-streaked. "You're making a mistake," he gasped. But the words came weak now, stripped of command. There will be reprisals. The cowboy stepped between him and the broken cage, coat billowing slightly in the fire's backwash. Reprisals already came, he said. You brought them. The registrar looked around in disbelief as one by one his riders lowered their rifles. The older rider let his weapon fall to his side. Sir, it's over. It is not. A shadow fell across him. The giant had stepped from the cage at last, not fast, not violent. He simply walked forward, dragging what was left of the chains behind him like a trail of broken law. The collar still clung to his throat, iron biting into burned flesh. The registrar's breath hitched. The giant did not raise a fist. He didn't need to. He just stood in front of the registrar, towering, battered, blood-soaked, and unbound where it mattered. The Apache woman stepped to his side, silent. The cowboy stood just ahead of them, eyes calm, posture unshaken. And above, the sniper sighted down the rifle, not to threaten, but to watch. The registrar's voice fell to a whisper. You're all finished. The cowboy looked at him. Then write it in ash. The fire had begun to die, starved of canvas and fuel, leaving only glowing embers scattered across the canyon floor like the last heartbeat of something that once believed itself powerful. Ash drifted slowly through the air, settling over everything, over stone, over iron, over boots and blood, erasing lines drawn by law and side, leaving only the simple truth of what remained. The registrar stood frozen, his coat singed, hair grey with ash. Without the ledger in his hand, he looked noticeably smaller, like a man who had mistaken authority for spine, and now felt the difference. One of his riders approached slowly, hat in hand, eyes lowered. Sir, he said quietly, we should leave. The registrar opened his mouth, but no command came, only a hoarse rasp, the sound of a man who had spoken too long and been heard too little. He looked at the scorched remnants of the ledger in the dust, pages crumbling into black fragments. He did not reach for it. The older rider turned his horse. Mount up, he said to the others, voice low but certain. For once, no one questioned the shift in command. One by one, the riders pulled back, guiding their horses away from the broken cage and the people standing before it. No retreat signal was given. They simply began to leave, like dust pulled by wind from a place it never truly belonged. The registrar lingered a moment longer, eyes darting between the giant, the woman, and the cowboy. His breath came shallow. You think this ends here, he said, voice trembling with something caught between threat and plea. You think fire and silence change the record, but someone will write this down. The cowboy looked at him, steady as carved stone. Let them write it, he said. Just make sure they spell it right. The registrar swallowed hard, ash sticking to his tongue. He gave no final decree, no dismissal, only stepped back, one foot slipping in the dust, before turning and following his men out of the canyon, leaving the ledger behind. Silence followed, not empty silence, but earned silence. The kind that comes after struggle, when the earth pauses to see what will be built over what was broken. The giant stood in the center of the clearing, shoulders scarred, collar still clinging to his neck like the last remnant of someone else's claim. He did not move toward the fleeing riders. He did not look after them. His attention was fixed only on the ground beneath his feet, as if feeling it accept him again. The Apache woman placed one hand against the iron collar. Her touch was steady, unflinching, reading its heat, the sting beneath it. She didn't rip it free, not yet. Some chains must be removed slowly, so the flesh beneath remembers why it resisted. The cowboy watched the horizon where dust from the departing riders began to fade. His hat brim cast his face in shadow, but his eyes stayed fixed, not on victory but on what must be guarded now that fire had spoken. Up on the ridge, the sniper remained motionless. He did not reload. He did not retreat. He rested the rifle against the stone, like a man who had done the only thing he came to do, and would wait as long as the canyon demanded before leaving. Wind moved again, lifting ash in gentle swirls. The giant finally spoke, voice rough like gravel pulled from a riverbed. Are chains gone? The Apache woman looked at the collar, then at the fire-cooled iron around his ankles. She did not lie. Not yet. The cowboy stepped closer to him, eyes on the horizon. "They don't break all at once." The giant nodded as if this answer was enough. For a long moment they stood there, not as savior and saved, not as outlaws or fugitives, but simply as those who remained when authority burned and ash settled. Then the cowboy spoke without turning. "Riders will talk. Towns will whisper. Apache giant. Lone rider. Woman who stood." That's how stories start. The woman's gaze followed the last trace of dust kicked up by the posse's retreat. Stories don't matter. The cowboy's eyes narrowed slightly. Not to paper. He glanced at the ash where the ledger lay in ruins. But to fire they do. Wind carried the last strip of burned page into the air, curling upward before disintegrating into nothing. Some stories don't end with victory. Some end with standing your ground long enough for chains to remember they were never meant to hold. If you want to walk further into these canyons, where fire judges law and silence speaks louder than gunfire, stay close. There are more stories buried beneath this dust. Subscribe before the next fire decides what gets written and what gets burned.